So welcome to our webinar today, where we will share the main findings from the paper, The Business Case for Green and Affordable Housing. I am Michelle Farrell, the Marketing and Business Development Lead for EDGE, and I'll be the moderator for today. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to the session. I will also be joined today by Rosemary Music, my colleague at IFC, who is the author of the paper. You will also hear from Tom Woodward, Climate Lead for Real, a UK-based investor in affordable homes. Before we start, a few notes about our webinar. For privacy reasons, you can't see the other participants, but we have a really great audience today. The webinar is being recorded. Materials will be shared in a few hours once the system generates the recording. The recording will be posted on our YouTube channel. You will receive an email as soon as the materials are ready. During the webinar, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom right-hand side of your screen to ask any questions. You can submit questions at any point during the webinar, as we are leaving plenty of time to answer these questions at the end. At the end of the presentation, before we turn to the questions, we'll ask you to fill out our feedback survey, which always helps us improve our delivery. We are so fortunate that this webinar has received incredible support from a number of agencies who are graciously serving as cross-promoters. This coalition shows just how important the topic is to international development. The case studies described in this presentation are about to be published in the Journal of Enterprise Development and Microfinance. You will be able to find it through the journal landing site. While this article puts the case study together for the first time, each project mentioned has its own published case study, which you can find on IFC's website. The case study builds on the experience of IFC's Green Market Transformation Program. IFC is a member of the World Bank Group focused on the private sector. We have a comprehensive program for green buildings and are recently adding components for resilience as well. Our green building approach includes investment advisory for both financial and intermediaries and directly into the building sector, public policy and enabling the environment, and the EDGE certification program. The global need for housing is both contributing to climate change and made worse by it. As we try to address the needs of 1.6 billion people without adequate housing, the building boom is not incorporating sustainable considerations. Residential buildings now represent 18% of the energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. These emissions are adding pressures of climate change and could create 140 million climate refugees displaced by weather and rising seas. Those lucky to have a roof over their head can spend 25% of their income on utilities and housing, showing the need for resource-efficient and resilient housing. Green buildings are often viewed as a construction method available only to high-end, mostly commercial properties in industrialized countries. But as you will see from the case studies in this presentation, there's a really strong business case for green affordable housing from 6 drivers of profitability. Number 1 is access to finance. Following that would be minimized incremental cost, faster sales, utility bill savings, lower default rates, and government incentives. Before we dive in, note that the presentation will focus on the benefits to the main stakeholders: government, lenders, developers, and home buyers. Here's a quick preview of how these benefits accrue across the value chain. Now let me turn it over to my colleague Rosemary for a deeper dive into these findings. Rosemary, let's talk about a case study of Colombia to show how green residential construction can rapidly take off. My understanding is that in 2017, Colombia had only 1 residential building certified by LEED. Can you tell us what have been the interventions since, and what are the results so far on this?
Thank you, Michelle. In Colombia, the green market took off when 2 commercial banks, Bancolombia and Davivienda, launched their green investment programs, which included the following: a common green standard, incentivized loans to developers, the banks reduced their interest rates to developers between 10 basis points all the way up to 2% less than typical financing. These were offered as commercial incentives by the banks because they believed green buildings are a better business for them. They launched education campaigns and technical assistance to developers with Camacol, the Colombian Chamber of Construction. And finally, we have green mortgages. Developers introduced homebuyers to the bank, which offered a discounted financing rate of 65 basis points. At the same time, the government introduced tax incentives for certain technical solutions. As a result, the green building market grew incredibly quickly, from that one lone property you mentioned in 2017 to 3.2 million square meters of certified space and counting. These results are from February of 2021. Almost 60% of this is in affordable housing.
That's a great study, Brusmir, and that should lead us into our first driver of profitability: access to international green finance. Tell us, why did these banks decide to launch these programs? What benefits did they get in the process of implementing green programs? And who else is launching these incentives?
One of the reasons these banks decided to launch a program is the incredible investor demand for green products. After the Paris Agreement in 2015, there are thousands of institutional investors and hundreds of cities that have committed to action for green. Investors are pouring their funds into green instruments, such as green bonds, which are expected to surpass $1 trillion in annual volume in just the next few years. All this is leading to a $15 trillion investment opportunity for green residential housing. This is indeed an opportunity for growth. The global real estate market was $5 trillion in 2017 in annual business, but only $423 billion of that was captured by green buildings. So increasing green penetration into conventional building, along with the immense growth of construction still expected, leads to these incredible large numbers mentioned. While the investor demand is growing, there aren't yet enough quality green projects to satisfy it. This is leading to a concept of a greenium for green finance, especially green bonds. So that's a green premium is a greenium. Investors have committed to green and are willing to pay that premium for these projects. The best place to find more information is the Climate Bonds Initiative, which produces the green bond pricing reports. IFC already partnered with them on a training for how to deploy green bonds for green buildings, which you can access in the links in this presentation, and you will soon get the presentation deck as well, as we mentioned. We can support these global trends with experiences from our clients. Bancolombia, which we mentioned, financed its green building program through a green bond, and that bond was 2.7 times oversubscribed and led to new investors. Developer Vinten in Mexico, another case study in this paper, had 50% more interest than targeted funds, accessing institutional investors, development finance institutions, and others. And government entities such as NHMSC in the Philippines can issue green bonds for a secondary mortgage market. Based on their commitment to green finance, many international lenders have launched incentives. Some offer preferential financing, others a combination of technical training, subsidized auditing, or certification. IFC's Edge website is profiling banks with the full list of lenders offering incentives, as well as the contact information for those developers looking for financing. One case study is ProCredit Bank, which is creating markets for green buildings across the world. The bank has country-specific programs in Ecuador, Kosovo, and Georgia with plans for expansion. At the same time, they're certifying their own offices. They were one of the first zero carbon buildings certified with EDGE. You can see the example of that building here. They offer a 0.5% reduction interest rate to both developers and mortgage seekers. They also offer education and technical assistance to developers, developed as a no-cost technical assistance program with EDGE certifiers. Standardized definitions are a key to market growth, so let's spend some time talking about that. There are common elements across definitions by standard setting bodies in green finance and real estate reporting. And they are that a green building must, one, be certified under an internationally recognized green certification standard. Two, show at least 20% improvement in energy consumption over the local baseline. And three, be able to quantitatively report impact metrics. IFC first shared this common definition in our green building paper in 2019, which you can find online through the link on this slide.
Okay, so I can understand why the banks are going green. They're getting better financing by going green, and they can pass this on to their investment clients. But why would the developers go green? Aren't the costs too high?
Great prompt, Michelle. The perception of high costs is one of the biggest barriers for green building. Developers often think that green will cost them 20 to 30% more, but in reality, it can be less than 1%. IFC is collecting experience from developers from across the world. They tell us they're keeping the costs down by incorporating passive design early into their planning process. IFC's free Edge tool helps developers understand their upfront costs and where to get the best returns for their interventions. Let me give you a case study of Vinte in Mexico, the developer we already mentioned that's doing green bonds. This illustrates how planning lowers costs, but going green helps with access to finance. Vinte builds entire affordable communities, which include hospitals, parks, and schools, with homes selling for about $20,000. Vinte financed this work through a green bond, which was listed on the Mexican Stock Exchange. As I mentioned, the bond had 50% more interest than funding needed. This demand from investors, which is much bigger than the supply, is what leads to that price tightening and better finance. Vinte also got international acclaim by landing on the Fortune magazine's profile of companies changing the world.
So to recap, working with tools like Edge, developers can lower their incremental costs for these green measures, but there's still some extra costs here, no matter how small. How do they get the return on their investment?
Michelle, the returns come from faster sales, and that comes from market differentiation. IFC has a marketing toolkit that helps developers gain competitive advantage. The templates that we have on our website are based on real-life examples we have already implemented with existing clients. Sometimes government incentives can help with quicker sales by increasing ability to purchase homes, as we have in the case study of Indonesia. What happens, as I said, is that this market differentiation leads to quicker sales cycle. This way, the developer can pay off their loans faster, and that ultimately lowers the cost of financing. And again, let me give you a case study. In Vietnam, Capital House sold homes 20% faster than their normal average, and this reduced their overall financing costs by 3%. A key factor was the expected 30% reduction in utility consumption, which Capital House achieved with only 1% increase in construction costs. Capital House partnered with IFC on a branding promotion, hosting an apartment showcase with IFC logo from the Edge certificate, which you can see in the background wall in this photo. And they explained to the buyers the benefits of green housing through a press release and a media kit. IFC can help developers replicate a similar event through our marketing toolkit.
Okay, so these benefits all sound great, but what assurance do buyers have that these predicted benefits will actually take place?
IFC knows that the lack of data to prove green buildings do indeed save on utility bills is one of the major obstacles to green market adoption. We think perception of high incremental sales or high incremental cost is one, and this lack of evidence for the reduced consumption. That is why we have a research and evidence program where we partner with clients to collect necessary information. For example, International Housing Solutions, IHS, tracked smart meter data in 3 of its rental properties in South Africa over the course of a year. There was even a control property built in a similar way, but without the green feature. Using this data, IHS was able to claim that lower utility bills have saved their residents the equivalent of 1 month of rent per year. In a different project from South Africa, residents speak how lowered utility bills allow them to divert money to food and clothing or toward saving for an upgraded apartment. In Haiti, the HOME program done with USAID trained local developers to apply environmental standards and help them offset the incremental costs. Homes were selling for less than $20,000, but were equipped with technology such as solar panels and rainwater collection. And this reduced utility consumption by over 40%. This project is just another example, an early leader showing the possibility of green and affordable construction, even in the poorest of countries such as Haiti.
So we have a really interesting question. We're talking about so many different countries here. What do we actually mean by affordable housing? Because it can vary so much from country to country.
That's a great point. IFC doesn't necessarily have a strict definition of affordable housing because it does vary by country. So here in this particular workshop, we're not talking about social housing. This is not housing that is provided for the government, either national or local governments, typically at free or at very, very reduced costs. We're talking that next tier up, where lower income and low middle income people can afford it. We actually have that in our Edge tool, where the developers can disclose which particular income category they're targeting in their development and purchases. Because we know that a household with lower income housing is going to have lower utility consumption, very, very different from a luxury housing. So again, for our definition, the purposes today, we looked at low income housing and lower middle income housing. And again, those were the numbers that were fed into the data that we have here.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that. So we've heard of the benefits to developers and ultimately to the homeowners. Let's come back to the banks and talk about the benefits to them. You talked about the possibility of gaining a greater market share and accessing better financing. What are some of the reasons banks would want to launch these green mortgages, and how could they do that?
For banks, it is the utility savings that offer the possibility for financial innovation because they can improve a borrower's risk profile. This is not very known, but buyers of green homes have a lower likelihood of defaulting on their mortgages, almost a third lower on average. The degree of efficiency also matters. More energy efficient buildings are associated with lower risk of default. This is in part because homeowners can use those utility savings toward their loan repayment. Remember that case study from South Africa where the renters, in this case is a rental property, saved 1 month of rent over the course of the year because of utility savings. They can put that money toward their bond repayment. So let's see how this would look like in practice. We're going to start by looking at a conventional home with a conventional mortgage. This base case has a 20% down payment requirement for the mortgage, has an 18% interest rate, which we thought was somewhat of an average in emerging markets, and a 10-year term repayment. Very different from here in the United States where we can get a 30-year mortgage. This is fairly typical for emerging markets, though this particular waterfall can be recalculated for specific local conditions. As we move through the scenarios, the bold figures will represent the main difference between that scenario and the base case. Scenario 1 is a green home where the cost of construction is 1% more, and therefore the sale price is also more expensive as a result. The increase in 1% is per feedback by our developer clients. However, the home has lower utilities, and this particular number was based on the smart meter example from South Africa. In this scenario, even though the mortgage payment is bigger, the monthly utility savings exceed higher mortgage payments. So the overall cost of ownership through a regular conventional mortgage actually decreases the overall cost of home ownership by 6%. So this is a win-win scenario where the bank gets more money, but the homeowner actually saves in the end. Interestingly, we don't have case studies in this particular example because our developers chose to sell the homes not at a premium, but at the same price. So let's take a look at what that would look like. In scenario 2, the green home does cost more, but the developer has decided to sell it without any price premium. We saw examples such as Vinte and Capital House, where developers chose this path in order to accelerate the pace of sales and save on their own cost of financing. This scenario reduces the total cost of ownership by 7% from the base case because those utility savings go into the total calculation. Scenario 3 illustrates the impact of a lower down payment, which is a particularly strong incentive for low-income home buyers, and this can be enacted through government policies. The case study in this case is the government of Indonesia, which decreased the down payment requirement from 20% to 15%. In this particular scenario, there's still no change to the total cost of ownership because, again, the lower utility bills offset the mortgage. But the lower down deposit increases access to finance for many low-income home buyers who now have to save less money to ultimately buy a home. Finally, our last scenario, scenario 4, incorporates a lower interest rate offered by the bank. We heard of many examples choosing this option based on the lower risk of default, such as Bancolombia and ProCredit. We can even show them later on the Edge website, where you can see how this particular incentive is structured and communicated to the market. And you can see where, if you're in these countries where the incentive exists, how you as a developer can access the financing, or as a home buyer, you can also access this as well. In this scenario, the total cost of ownership is reduced by 8%. Now, it may look like the bank is losing some income, but remember that they're balancing this reduction in interest rate with other benefits. We mentioned the home buyer is less risky and less likely to default, and so the interest rate reflects that lowered risk of default. The bank may be accessing lower cost of financing for its own funding. We heard from Bancolombia and others that they actually were able to reduce their cost of borrowing, and they may be choosing to pass that on to their buyer. Or finally, the bank may be doing this as a promotion to gain greater market share in the market. Bancolombia told us that their project in Colombia was incredibly successful. The program was about $400 million, and they're looking to expand that into neighboring countries now as well. Overall, here's how all the scenarios compare across the board. We see that all of these different options result in net benefits to both the bank and the homeowner, resulting in a win-win scenario. I'll give you one more case study where green mortgages create further possibilities for innovation, such as securitization and secondary mortgage markets. Philippines' National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation, known as NHMFC, is leading in the promotion of green affordable homes through what they're calling their Balay Verde program. The company, government-owned, issues green bonds to acquire mortgages from green housing loan originators and serves as a market creator, catalyzing the creation of a green mortgage market in the country. The webinar that we finished for Asia actually had NHMFC as a speaker, so you actually will be able to find the recording of that webinar on our YouTube channel, and we've done other promotion with them as well. So if you're from a government agency, we can talk to you about how to do this as well.
Okay, great. We have a question that's quite relevant to this. So someone has said that they've learned when they hear about affordable housing, people who need it do not necessarily have the capability to buy a home, nor do they have access to mortgages. So are the developers assuming the risk of owning the homes, or how does that work?
IFC is doing this particular work where we understand that we need to kind of move the entire market together. So we are actually working with local financial institutions to launch green mortgages, to have a steady pipeline where we can increase the access to finance by local home buyers to be able to have a mortgage and access it that way. In some cases, this may be a rent to own structure, again, where the home buyer is basically buying into the equity of the home, does not have to put the down deposit, and eventually can turn that over into the government program. So know that as IFC, we are working on both the supply of green stock by educating the developers, and we're working on the demand of the green stock by helping with the access to finance. I saw one of the other questions came, and maybe I'll answer it now, came on the chat, which is, are the mortgage interest rates in the USD or local currency rates? All of the examples we have are in local currency. They are in the local markets. And again, at the end of the presentation, we'll show you the website. We'll be able to see that. We've converted a lot of the numbers to USD for easier comparison around the countries, but all of the examples we have, the homes are selling in the local market, they're selling in the local currency, and they're being bought in mortgage rates through a local currency.
Mm-hmm. And then just one final question before we move forward. Are there any programs for retrofitting of existing homes? I'll ask this, even though I know the answer. And do these programs only apply to new builds?
Our best examples so far are new builds. And the reason for that, it is easier to change the construction of the building and incorporate the green elements. And as you saw, in many cases, this was done at 1% or less incremental cost. So we encourage anybody who is thinking about new buildings to basically switch the program. The other reason that new buildings for homes are a little bit easier is that we're working with one developer. So during the course of the construction, it is still only one developer that's putting together either an apartment building or some sort of housing complex. And so it is easier for that person to incorporate these pieces. Retrofits get a little bit more complicated because we now have to work with multiple home buyers who have already bought their homes, and they have to go through the retrofit process. IFC is looking at these options as well. We are looking at, again, how we may launch local financing. We've had a great program in the Ukraine, for example, where we had funds available to local financial institutions who then did an on-lending to their buyers to do the retrofit. You can imagine very harsh winters in the Ukraine and Eastern Europe. And so things like windows, insulation, and others really, really helped with the lowering of utility bills. The examples we have so far, as I said, have been more successful in new buildings where it's easier to switch. We do want to work with people to start bringing the business case for retrofits just as well. And of course, you're on mute now. It was bound to happen.
Everybody. So now we have covered the banks, developers, and homeowners. The one stakeholder we've mentioned but haven't discussed deeply is governments. How can local and national governments act to create markets, and what are the benefits to them?
Great question. National and local governments have a tremendous role to play. In partnership with the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, which is one of our cross promoters for the webinar, IFC helped launch case studies of governments already implementing action. And again, everything we're saying today has already been done by some stakeholder. This is not a theoretical case. We have a toolkit for governments who are looking to launch their own programs, along with a suite of possible interventions and case studies. On a local level, there may not be a lot of awareness of how non-fiscal incentives can be just as effective as fiscal incentives, which create another win-win situation. The local government does not lose any budget, but the developers can certainly monetize incentives such as expedited permitting or height bonus allowance and put that into their cash waterfall. You can see that we have a growing list of examples from across the world of both fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. And again, the links to these case studies are available from our website today. One example is Peru, where local municipalities are providing a height bonus. And this height bonus offers multiple benefits. Developers actually sell more housing units on the same plot of land. So they're saving money that way. Governments, interestingly, collect more real estate taxes because they have additional units to sell. So not only is this not a loss to the government for this incentive, they actually get more money in the end. Buyers get lower utility costs, and the incentive kickstarts a green trend as all stakeholders amass green experience and know-how. In the municipality of Lima in San Borja, over 1,000 units have been certified as of February 2021, saving $387,000 in utility costs for the residents. The government incentive created a trend. So now other municipalities are asking IFC to help them implement a similar incentive. And this has led to Peru now having over 3,400 certified green homes. Again, the data is as of February, totaling over 400 meters square certified in the end.
Rosemary, I think you've really laid down a compelling argument for green investments and interventions that benefit developers, governments, banks, and home buyers. To get more flavor about this, let's hear from one of our actual clients. I'll turn it over to Tom Woodward, Climate Lead for Real, a UK-based investor in affordable homes. I will also take this opportunity to congratulate them as well, as they were recently shortlisted for the Financial Times Transformational Business Awards, acknowledging their achievements in bringing green and affordable homes worldwide. Tom, let's turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Michelle and Rosemary, both for the invitation to speak and also for the congratulations and also for what's been a great presentation so far. I'm going to talk to you today about our experience as Real in both delivering climate smart affordable housing and in particular of using EDGE. Next slide, please, Rosemary. So I will start by introducing Real itself. So we are an innovator and investor in affordable housing across Asia and Africa, with an emphasis on that affordable housing being climate smart. Our goal is to improve the life chances of 100 million people across Africa and Asia by 2030 through that method. Next slide, please, Rosemary. We do this through two methods. Our first is build. So we work with housing developers across the range of countries that we work in who are local and support them through investment and technical support in delivering commercially and environmentally viable houses for the bottom 40% of the local income pyramid, which is how we tend to define affordable housing. And we do so in a way that stimulates private sector interest and catalyzes investment into the sector. So everything we do demonstrates commercial viability and scalability. We then take everything that we learn, every proof of concept, every case study, and then we broker strategic market interventions, be that with multinationals, be that with local banks, be that with major banks, to generate access to climate smart affordable housing at scale. Next slide, please, Rosemary. And through that approach, in the last 30 years, we've supported over 3.5 million people, including 750,000 people helped to develop, improve, or own their own home. Almost 1.5 million people gaining security from threat of eviction. Almost 500,000 people benefiting from improved water provision, and over 1 million people benefiting from improved sanitation. The next slide, please, Rosemary. And that, in terms of our investment, looks like $72 million invested across 167 projects, with a demonstrated average cost per home of just $12,000 US, showing that this is possible at a very affordable level. Next slide, please, Rosemary. Now, we're very proud of these numbers, but we also know that there is an enormous amount to do, and we know that we're doing that in the context of a significant climate crisis worldwide. We know that 70% of buildings that will exist in Africa and Asia by 2050 are yet to be built, And we know that 77% of population growth by 2050 will occur in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, which are also two of the most vulnerable regions in the world to the effects of climate change. Now, I'm sure most people on this call are familiar with the challenge of the built environment, and as Michelle alluded to earlier, the fact that 39% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the built environment. So as we address this lack of affordable housing and this 1.6 billion people who don't have access to quality housing, we need to do so in a way that has a path to net zero, has a path to low carbon, and that's really what we're trying to do. And that, next slide please, Rasmir, is why we started using Edge over 2 years ago now. And during that time, we have supported over 40 members of our own team and across our partner network in using Edge, and through that process have got over 1,000 affordable housing units approved that will meet the Edge standard that we've invested in. And we estimate that as a result of that, we are going to avoid around 18,000 tons or more of CO2, and hopefully do even better in the years to come. So the reasons that we've chosen to use Edge are really, there's three kind of primary ones. The first is that we as an organization are committed to a net zero and resilient world. And we know that in order to achieve that, we're not going to do it in one gigantic leap. We've got enough track record of the world and the built environment to know that that isn't the way to go. And we think that Edge provides a really good platform to make incremental, steady, but positive steps in the right direction. The way that the tool is set up and that we're able to use it with partners means that you can identify the easy wins and the low-hanging fruit, the passive design principles and the low cost or cost positive options that partners could do or indeed are already doing, and metricize those. We can identify where the wins are, and we can do that in a standardized way that applies across our whole partner network using the Edge app. We also know that the tool maps well to our affordable housing sector. It's not just a certification system, it's a tool in and of its own right. And for some of our developers that are very small scale and just starting out, that is exactly what they need. They need to be able to work from the very beginning on how to think green, how to design green, and how to build green. And that's the really accessible thing about the tool for developers that are working on tight margins with $12,000 homes or $10,000 homes or $8,000 homes. They need to be able to work through this with relatively low capacity, but know what they're doing that's helping, and as they scale up to proceed to much bigger developments, that they've already got the foundations in place to make the right climate decisions. And we're finding that that's already happening. And we're finding that that's then leading into the third major benefit for us, that is that we're seeing Edge is a recognized international standard, exactly as Michelle and Rasmir talked about. Most of the larger funders that we talk to are fully familiar with Edge. It really helps us promote ourselves as a climate smart organization, and it helps us have a commonly recognized international standard across the 14 plus countries that we work in. So I'll talk you through that with a couple of specific case studies. So next slide, please, Rasmir. The first of these is a partner we have called BuildX Studio in Kenya, and they're currently developing with our support a program called Zima Homes, which is a 150 unit pilot scheme in urban Nairobi. It's demonstrating homes that are genuinely affordable to the bottom 40%, and it's achieving in its initial Edge registration and preliminary certification phases around 26% reduced energy consumption, 33% reduced water consumption, and 50% lower embodied energy in materials. And it's doing so in a way that is allowing us to have conversations and identify both what we have achieved now and what we can achieve now, and also recognizing that this is the start of a much bigger scale up, what we need to focus on next, not just the things that are affordable today, but what design decisions we need to take, what market unblocking decisions we need to take around supporting, for example, green mortgages that will actually allow us to do even better in future years. Next slide, please, Rasmir. If we then go across to Asia, another example of a project that we've supported is another pilot that we've done with an organization called Modulus Tech, who are based in Pakistan. And they've done a pilot in Karachi where the homes cost as little as $8,000, And yet they're achieving a staggering 97% reduced energy consumption, 29% reduced water consumption, and 71% lower embodied energy and materials. And those numbers really allow us to illustrate through the tool exactly how well that building is performing. And the way that they've achieved that is through starting from climate principles and using that tool the entire time that they've developed this project. So really flipping the whole idea of how you develop a building on its head. They've used lightweight panels that are heavily insulated, strong passive design principles that generate strong airflow and improved insulation in a very hot part of the world, and integrating low energy solutions and solar PVs at the same time. So the really positive thing that we're able to do there on that same idea of scaling up is we can demonstrate a proof of concept. We know that it works, and now we just need to work through how we scale that model up, knowing that we are able to demonstrate to other entities, other stakeholders and other funders that this is genuinely a green building. And it's been fantastic that both of these projects have been shortlisted in a number of international competitions that we'll be able to reveal hopefully very shortly. So last, please, Rizmir. And so I'd really just like to finish off by thanking Rizmir and Michelle again for the invitation to talk and to highlight the importance of this event for demonstrating that there is a genuine business case for housing that is legitimately affordable and legitimately green. And what we want to do is crowd other actors into what we think is a $17 trillion market that is largely uncrowded and that is critical to boosting and strengthening the resilience of communities vulnerable to climate change worldwide.
Great, thank you, Tom. I have a question for you, actually, since you're working a lot in sub-Saharan Africa. So sub-Saharan Africa is faced with the challenge of high cost of financing and lending rates. How can a green buildings program, such as yours, which has been successful, be successfully implemented in light of this challenge?
It's a really good question, Michelle. I think it's one that we've been working on for a long time. One of the critical barriers that we've recognized to expanded access to affordable housing is the finance gap. I think the fact that you've highlighted earlier that there is so much high level funds flowing into green initiatives means that there's a twin approach here where actually with kind of greenium funding that we know is becoming available, linked to the identified benefits of delivering green housing that reduces utility bills, linked to the reliability and linked to innovative tenure models like rent to buy. We can start to link these things up, and where one of them on its own might struggle to gain traction, all of them together really can have an effect. So we know interest rates are high. We know that there are challenges in accessing mortgages. We have lots of partners that are demonstrating the potential of doing so across our network, from Mozambique to Nigeria, that I would love to talk about if I had more time, and that you can go and look at on our website below. But really, that's the critical thing, is that actually, if you link those things up, you can support housing becoming more green and becoming more affordable with access to mortgages at the same time.
Great, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, which illustrated just how these concepts work in practice. Let me go back to Rizmir for concluding remarks. Rizmir, I think you laid down a very compelling argument for green interventions that benefit developers, governments, banks, and home buyers. In your conclusion, can you tell us the global results of this program and the tools that IFC may have available for those who want to explore these options after this webinar?
Absolutely. So this presentation and the journal article that is about to launch collate some of the growing number of data points that shows that green and affordable housing construction can be profitable for everyone. But we do believe that in countries from the case studies mentioned, a fundamental market transformation is already underway. I was looking through some of the questions and people are asking for case studies, like places in Kenya and others. They are all available on our website. So I think it's important to go and really see what has happened. IFC has helped its partners and clients certify almost 10 million meters square of residential space, over 60% of which is an affordable housing segment. Again, numbers as of February, so they keep growing. That represents 80,000 families that can now enjoy lower utility bills. We're confident we can replicate these results in other countries, and we do invite you to work with us. IFC has free tools that you can utilize to join the green revolution. Today, you heard a lot about EDGE, and that provides a process for green buildings. You can access the EDGE information online, and there are training modules that will show you how you can plug your particular project through EDGE. Our Building Resilience Index looks at resilience to issues such as climate and seismic disasters. We're piloting it in places like the Philippines and are looking to partner with people for better data collection. And finally, we have the Apex tool, which helps with planning on the city level. So if you're a city official watching this, do reach out to us and we can work with you on giving you access to Apex. Each of these is accompanied with education, case studies, training. A lot of our training is online. You can get accredited. And all of that means that you can turn over and create ultimately proof of concept. So hopefully you heard from us today. You heard these great case studies, and let's turn over to more Q&A to see how we can wrap up the session.
Of course, but before we end today, we must thank our donors, without whose help this work would not be possible, and who are allowing us to have free resources available to help you. And then before we go to the Q&A, I'll just wrap up again. Thank you so much for Rosemary and Tom for your presentation today, and thank you all for listening. Before we turn over to questions, let me remind you that the webinar was being recorded, and we will share the materials in a few hours once the system generates the recording. Please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions, and don't forget to fill out our survey, please, after. Once you close out of the webinar, the program will automatically take you to the survey site, and it's very important to our quality of webinars that we produce. All right, so let me go through some of the questions here. It looks like we have a lot of really strong questions. For anyone that's asking for more information, I have put my email in there, which is mfarrell2@ifc.org. So if there's a very specific question on a country or a project, please send me an email. That would be great. Then we have answered the question, does EDGE get involved with retrofit or new construction? We absolutely do retrofit and new construction. And also IFC gets involved with these. Another question is, since climate change has been embraced as the existential crisis of our time, how come the carbon credit markets only pay around $15 per ton of CO2? I don't know if we have the answer for that one necessarily, but
know that the World Bank is working on projects that would put a price tax on carbon, and we do have partners for carbon offsets and others. So we are, again, involved in that process. It's a little bit outside of the scope of our work.
Yeah. Now, would a developer be a local developer in the country when you're working on these projects in which these buildings would be built, or would it be a developer that's recommended and approved by IFC?
There's really no process for us to approve or recommend a developer that we work with. We find that housing is typically being done on a local basis. So most of the developers that we work with are indeed local. We work with funds such as Real, who comes in more maybe as a cross-regional funder, and then they work with the local bodies to do their work. I stopped sharing for a bit so I can open up some of the slides, but I'm going to show you the resources on our EDGE website where you can actually see these project studies. When you get the presentation today, there'll be more case studies, and again, as I said, more will also be shared in the paper. So this is the EDGE Buildings website, and I'm going to turn to my other screen. So edgebuildings.com is here. This is all of our project studies, which we can filter by home. So you can see that we have certified over 250 projects around the world. Some high-rise processes, all the way down to sort of more modest homes. Let's see, we have a great example in the Philippines as well. One of the questions I saw kind of as I was scrolling is, how can a project have 97% reduced energy? And that's because we're putting solar panels on those projects as well. So Tom has talked about the project that he's working on. We have a great project from places like the Philippines where the developer is able to sell this in the low income market as affordable while there are solar panels on top of that particular building. So even, even really going full zero carbon where the entire energy is being supplied by PVs is in fact possible. So you can see the names here. In our case studies, we typically describe who was the investor and who was the construction agent. So you can actually see all of the pieces of the particular case study. Maybe I can open one as well. So I think that's hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, and then let me add another question about case studies. Are we able to advise the delivery track record of the developer prior to moving green?
We can. So IFC partners with certifiers who can go through and actually explain Edge for you if you're interested. We do a lot of education. So again, under the Learn panel here, you can see there's other events. And we also have Edge experts training. So if you have a technical team that wants to utilize this, they can find out info through the Learn module in the end. Once you either decide to have an in-house expert, you may go that route, or you can decide to actually work with one of our pre-existing Edge experts. So these are consultants. They can help you. Many of them will do 1 or 2 hours for free because they know that this is something that's going to give them additional business. So you can find all of our Edge experts by country. They're not necessarily limited to the country where they are. They can usually work across the world, and you can hire them this particular way. So I would say the best way to do is to either get an internal Edge expert trained or work with a pre-existing Edge expert who can help you incorporate Edge early into your planning process. It is something we've heard. The example in Haiti, the anecdote is that the developer said this is the first time that they had to pause and really think about what it is they're doing because they were so used to just kind of going with the motions, and Edge forced them to stop and think, are the things that I'm doing really the right thing for my particular environment, hot and humid in Haiti. And let's see, I'll open up and I'll show you the list of Edge experts in a country such as Kenya.
And then I have another question as well. How do you certify a project with Edge? What is the first step? And I can answer that one where you start gathering information and putting into the Edge app. And then I'm going to follow up with that for the question for you, Rosemary. How much does the Edge app cost?
Great. So I mentioned our Edge Buildings YouTube. So you can see here that we actually have a lot of training videos which you can access. So how to meet the Edge standard is here. How to register and how to certify a project are all described in very short videos. The Edge app itself is completely free. So as you heard, we have a generous pool of donors who have enabled us to basically launch this product as a public good for free. So you are able to go through, you don't even have to log in. We do recommend logging in. This is the Edge app. You can access it and start putting your product in. Hopefully you will have watched some of the training videos. The certification varies somewhat based on where the project is and the complexity of the project, but it's typically $10,000 per project or less. Sometimes our certifiers will give discounted certification prices because they know that projects are repeating their work, or they'll give a discount if there's an Edge expert involved. So the pricing does vary, but it is all released here, and you can see the certifiers and the pricing, and you'll be able to get a quote for your project to understand its complexity and how much will that cost you. But as I said, about $10,000 all in, even including an expert in the end.
Mm-hmm. Then another question is, can the embodied energy data be adjusted for local conditions? Say, for example, if masonry units are manufactured on site or where sites require long delivery distance.
Great question. We have a project that we call special ruling. And so if you have particular conditions, you can again work with our certifiers and the Edge expert to really sort of create a compelling argument for why something should be recognized outside of the normal Edge calculation. And we can do that through that particular process.
Okay, great. Then finally, we've gone through different types of questions here. I'm just going through the final last ones. Tom, are you working in the Caribbean? This is any pilot projects there. Is that one of your areas that you're working in?
Afraid not at the moment, but I'll let you know if we ever start.
I think he's eager to work in the Caribbean, so we can see. Maybe in the future. And okay, most of the cities are pretty much built up. Is there any plan in the pipeline for upgrading the existing building stock and taking a approach towards that?
Yes, so we will be launching additional tools. Edge can be used today for retrofits. And again, it will help you calculate your incremental costs. It will help you calculate what the energy savings would be. We have some ideas of making that a little bit smoother. We think, and again, I'll be honest, we think that this will be a little bit easier in the commercial sector, where again, you have one owner of the building. It's going to be a little bit harder when we disaggregate that on the level of individual apartment owners. Where we hope is that markets for energy services companies and others may take off, and that's going to be the part where IFC can then train them to incorporate Edge and start building it into their system. It is all available today, so people can use this. We do have presentations to select cities where we're working to, again, encourage them to go through the retrofit process where IFC can finance that transition through the city mechanisms as well.
Okay, we have another question. Have there been zero carbon certifications for low-income housing?
They are coming up. So the Victoria Highlands project is essentially zero carbon. So you can see that we actually certified it as Edge Advanced because it's doing some pretty high energy savings. I think we just have to have a top up really of the energy costs. So in some countries, it is hard to actually procure renewable energy from offsite. So if the project doesn't, you can see these roofs are not necessarily that big, they may not be able to provide solar energy for on-site. So the project would have to purchase renewable energy offsite, and that can be difficult because of regulation. The Philippines was a great example because this particular developer helped lobby the government to change net metering laws. And so those projects that do have excess power can actually sell it back to the grid and make a little bit more money. But that is not always available in other places. And so there could be a need for governmental policy change to make that ultimately possible. But we do have projects that are considered Edge Advanced, and we would think of those as net zero ready. And then we do have other projects now in the commercial sphere that have been certified as zero carbon as well. So you can see that the refrain is some things really are a little bit easier when it comes to commercial, one owner, one interface. Things get a little bit harder when it comes to homes, but we do have processes to get there as well. And these are our first zero carbon projects too.
I'm just looking at the time here. So I would like to give you the last 2 minutes, Rosemary, to just wrap up and thank everyone for attending the webinar. And thank you so much for your information and your paper today, which I'm definitely encouraging everybody to read. And yes, let me hand it back over to you.
No, that's great. I think the message here is processes and programs already exist. So all you have to do is plug in. We know that homes and buildings are being built today, but so all they need to do is to switch over to the right track and incorporate green. Hopefully we're showing you that doing that is actually incredibly profitable. There may be a marginal cost increment, but you can recuperate that as a developer, as an investor, and then the ultimate home buyers can again create demand by going in and asking for this to take place. If you're interested and you want to look at who it is that's doing this work, this is the example of the banks that are financing. So if you're in any of these countries, then some of these incentives are already available to you. And again, if you are in any of these particular government locales, again, all of these incentives are available to you. In other places, we can help create the program. We'll send out, we do have some local Edge teams that can help answer your questions and guide you. Other times, just make sure that you are subscribing to our mailing list, because you'll find out other webinars, other case studies that are going on. We'll send all of this information today. You'll get a ton of case studies and the recording. And as I said, the paper itself will be launched in just a little bit. So we need more dreamers like Real to get it going worldwide, but we think we have a really strong body of case studies that should compel everybody to ultimate action. And that is it.
All right, great. Thank you everyone for attending today. And again, thank you, Rosemary and Tom, for participating in the webinar. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us today and all the great questions. If we missed your question, I've put my email on the list here, and we will also be going through in the next few minutes. So if you still have a question up that's a burning question for you, we will be going through and answering those as well. Okay. So thank you everyone for attending today, and have a good day.